Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to explain a little problem you might come across if you use paint markers on canvas. But just to clarify, in this video I'm using literally a raw piece of canvas that I cut out and primed with one layer of gesso. Normally you're probably going to buy a pre-stretched canvas which has the canvas stapled onto a frame, and they prime it with a couple of layers of white gesso so it won't be as rough as this one in the video, so this is an exaggerated example. But you might also choose to use raw canvas at some point. But the same thing applies for this, just adding a couple of layers of acrylic paint. You'll see what I'm talking about when you watch the video. Please feel free to ask any questions to clarify. Here's a problem you might run into when you're painting with paint markers on canvas. If your canvas is not primed with enough paint, your lines might come out like this, kind of rough looking, like the line's not solid. And you see here as I'm filling in, it's just not filling in completely solid. It's because it's too rough. Another problem could be that you need to shake the marker and press it to get the paint flowing out, but that's only half the problem here. If you get the paint flowing by pressing the nib down, you might get more solid lines, but the canvas is still going to be so rough that it's going to tear up your nib, which is the tip of your marker, and it's also kind of going to soak up more paint out of your paint marker over time. So what you can do is take some acrylic paint and paintbrush it on or spatula it on. Here I'm using a paint spatula. You could also use a credit card. Here I'm using a gift card from an art store. Works just about as good as the spatula. Now once the paint dries and you try again, you'll see that the paint comes off the marker onto the canvas a lot more smoothly. And even in this one, it's still slightly rough, and that means I didn't put enough paint on the canvas. Could have done another layer, but it's way better than it was before. And also here I'm starting from a completely raw canvas with only one layer of gesso. If you buy a pre-made canvas, it's going to have at least 2 layers of gesso already on it, so it probably won't be that rough, but it will still be good to put 1 or 2 layers of some kind of color acrylic paint, as I'm showing you here. Another point I want to make is if you're priming your canvas yourself with just gesso, gesso is rough in itself. It's made rough because it's supposed to help kind of catch the paint off a paintbrush as you're brushing, so it's a little more gritty. So that's why I'm using actual acrylic paint, like colored paint from a tube, because that's going to dry a little more smoothly, possibly glossy if you get a glossy type, and that'll give you a smoother surface to work on with the marker. So if you're just priming with gesso, you're going to have a rough surface. It's going to soak up more paint because it's going to be kind of like paper in a way. It's going to be very porous, and it'll tear up your paint marker nib. So get some tubes of color paint, and if you get the cheap ones, they're not going to cover as well. So invest in a decent one like the one I'm using, which is Liquitex Basics.